All right, everybody. So today, back on the podcast favorite, Steve Hall. How we doing, man?
Am I a favorite? That makes me feel special. I
You're one
like
of the VIPs, man. One of the originals.
it. I'm always like shocked at I don't know if you ever do it, Dave, but looking at like different guests and how many views they get. And I'm
Yeah.
always like, oh wow, like YouTube really likes certain people. And I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
I'm not quite I'm kind of in the YouTube scene, but not quite because I kind of vlog, kind of don't. I keep
Hmm.
up to date with like the Noble Natties and
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
but not fully, and I don't know them all super well. Like Basement Bodybuilding, I don't actually know his real name. That's I just know him as Basement
Yeah, yeah.
Bodybuilding. And I haven't seen tons of his content. I've listened to him on your podcast because I like you as an interviewer, so I know you're going to ask
Thanks.
stuff I'm interested in. So yeah, anyway, just my way of saying I like to think that I'm somewhat known on YouTube to some extent by
For
some people.
sure. Well, I think it's interesting when you'll see somebody, like you said, you'll see the different guests on maybe like a newer podcast, and sometimes you'll be surprised at who has the views, and it can be flattering. Like I've seen myself have high views on different podcasts, or you, and obviously like Helms always gets good views. But then sometimes you have somebody who it's really interesting. It just kind of depends on the channel because I've had people who have like 200 plus thousand subscribers and like a strongman or something like that, and I'm like, this is an awesome person to talk to, and then the views are just kind of whatever. Like I can think of two in mind right now who I actually just enjoy talking to them. Like even if the podcast were to be a total flop, I would want to talk to them. But I just know going into it, like this is not going to be a super popular podcast. Whereas conversely, there might be somebody where it's just kind of like, all right, I mean, people want me to talk to them, so I'll talk to them. But like, I don't know if I'm actually that interested in the conversation. I try to avoid those for the most part, but
Yeah,
they come up. Yeah,
yeah, I've considered that like getting on a popular guest just for the sake of like they're popular and it just feels so inauthentic and that's like that's not where we built our kind of podcast from.
sure.
But yeah, an example comes I was just saying about Terrence. I love Terrence Ruffin. He's like awesome guy, but I can't think what the views are on a podcast with him, but they'll be like Mike Israetel will still get like way
Yeah,
more, even though I guess Mike Israetel's a bad comparison. But yeah, Terrence will get a similar number to just another guest who maybe is way less known on social media,
yeah,
but
yeah,
because my audience is evidence-based natural bodybuilders and stuff,
sure.
Terrence doesn't attract as many ears maybe
Do you
or eyes.
do you and Mike still talk pretty regularly?
No, nowhere near as we used to.
Yeah,
So I don't know, maybe over the last 2 years, but since he was investing way more time into YouTube, just that relationship kind of started to dwindle a little bit. Just he's
mm,
so much more busy, essentially.
sure, sure.
He's got so many more things pulling him, and we didn't do a seminar last year, which was the first time we haven't ran a seminar when we kind of outside of COVID times. So it's just not worth his kind of
Sure.
time, which I get.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
unfortunately, yeah, not managed to keep up that relationship as tightly as it used to be.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean I get it. Like too, like people just get busy. You can't do everything. I messaged him maybe a couple weeks back and he got back to me like 2 weeks later and I was like, oh, okay, cool. And but yeah, I think that's just kind of how it goes, in some cases. But I also appreciate the people who like I had a brief conversation with Jeff Nipper the other day, like just very short interaction, but just that like it's nice when people still are like normal, like they're just like normal people, you know what I mean? Because you do get some people, won't name anybody, but like where it's like you look at where their previous content was and now, and you're like, well, this probably was how you actually are because that's how you were for like years. And then there's just like this transformation, and you can't blame them because it's working, right? It works, but the inauthentic nature of it. And I'm not talking about Mike Israel, but like other people where I've seen it, and it's just like you're kind of just like a fake persona. So you got to do what works for your business, but it's not the same type of interaction.
Yeah. Yeah, thankfully for Mike, that is just how he is.
Yeah, yeah, no, he
Otherwise, it'd be
actually,
super exhausting. I think he just lent into being more and more Mike.
yeah, yeah, no, I agree, at least from what I know about him. So man, I wanted to jump into a few things here. Okay, first, can we get a little reveal here of this physical transformation, your
Yeah.
biggest transformation?
Yeah, I decided I couldn't be a Super Saiyan. My hair was never going to be of a standard to be like Trunks back there. So I was just like, oh, I'll be
Boom.
Saitama. Is that how you say his name? One
Oh
Punch
yeah,
Man?
yeah, I think so.
Satama?
The Tom, I think.
So yeah, I bought the foil trimmer and everything so I can keep it short,
How long has
shave
it
it
been
every
like
two
that?
days. So I got it done. Literally, I got it done on New Year's Eve. I
Okay.
was just like, fuck it, I'm gonna go do it. I called my girlfriend. I'd already warned her that I was thinking about this, and she
Yeah,
was
yeah.
just like, oh damn, okay. The guy in the barber shop was trying to convince me not to do it. He like
Oh,
gave me a
really?
short haircut, probably a similar length to yours, and I was like,
Okay.
dude, it looks terrible. Please
Oh.
just take it off. And he was like, are you sure? Are you sure? I was like, yes, please.
Yeah, well, as we were discussing before recording, I like at this point in my life, I wouldn't care about doing it at all, if not for my work and the patients and the conversations I'd have to have a million times a day. Because like otherwise, like if I was just working at home, I mean, like literally, who cares? It's gonna grow back if it doesn't look good. Like I'll just test it out, and in a month, it'll be like a buzz cut, and then we'll just go from there. But I see many patients, and I just a lot of these patients I've known for years now, and I just don't want to have the conversation 20 times a day. Oh, you shaved your head, you shaved your head. And it's just like, oh God. I mean, not that that's the only reason, but it's just it would be an annoyance for sure. But
You're in you're actually in a really interesting space because you're in the fitness industry, but also like dentistry and everything like that is kind of like cosmetics, and
mhm,
it's like part of it is entangled with like beauty standards and
sure.
that sort of thing. And I find that very interesting. And yeah, you must have like the growth of people talking about it online and everything
Yeah,
is
yeah. I mean,
really
I do a
crazy.
lot of consults and like smile transformations. We just did one on Wednesday. That's it's going to come out really nicely. There was this guy. He was in an accident and like his entire jaw basically shifted, and so we did orthodontics for a year, and then we're doing all these crowns, like basically like a full mouth rehab. So I'm excited to get like the end result there. But absolutely, there's like a big cosmetic component to it, and then there's like a surgical component to it. So it is cool. But yeah, like it's interesting. You'll get people who ask about like Botox and veneers and things, but it's cool to have that kind of mix of it, you know?
Yeah, it's because I think at least my decision, or yeah, I think some of my reasoning for being obsessed about it more than maybe I even should have been is because of how much it's grown on social media. And you're getting people like gifted hair transplants or something,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
they don't even need it. They don't even need a hair transplant.
Yeah.
They've got a
Right.
great hairline. So, yeah, it's just, I mean, that's a whole topic in its own right, where
Sure,
especially
sure.
like veneers, like I look at people on, I don't know, Love Island or something like
Yeah,
this,
yeah, yeah.
those shows. I'm like, their teeth are too perfect. Like, what's
Yeah,
going on?
sure.
And so, yeah, it's interesting. Like, I look at my teeth and I'm like, man, they're so wonky and yellow compared to these actors online or influencers.
Yeah, yeah. Well, from here, your teeth look fine, but it's something I've talked with other dentists about. It's funny. Like we'll see some people like who played Superman, Henry Cavill,
Yeah.
and his teeth are incredibly crowded on the bottom teeth there. And Drew Barrymore, like there's a few other ones, Tom Cruise, and you kind of think like, man, you have so much money. Like I could correct this for $5,000. Like it would be nothing to them, and I could do it in a few months. But the other side of it, it's like if they don't feel a need to do it, then good for them. It's totally fine. It's just interesting. Some people go like so heavy into it, and other people are like, no, this is me, and it just is what
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, Henry Cavill's a good example too, because his hair is one where it's receded quite a
Mm.
bit. I'm sure he gets comments of people being like, "Oh, you should get a hair transplant," blah blah blah, and it's just like, man, he's just got like quite normal, like for his age,
Yeah,
hair.
yeah,
Like actually,
right,
he's doing
right.
pretty well there, and he's
Yeah, yeah.
like by all standards one of the most handsome guys on
Yeah,
the
right,
internet.
right.
So I kind of like that some of them have not like revolted against it, but they've just decided I'm not going to go.
It's just
Like
what
I
it is.
could, but
Sure.
I'm not going to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, man, so you are how old now?
So 35 this year, so I'm 34, but I'm in
Okay.
my 35th year, I guess.
Okay. Because I want to get into a few things. I want to get into like training as we get older and whatnot. I want to get into, this cut that you've been doing, how much you dropped down because you dropped down to, I think you said you dropped down to 160, right? For the first time in like forever.
Yeah, I can't believe I weighed 160. My body weighed 160, but I'm surprised by how much depletion you can do. So,
Yeah,
like,
it's
if you
crazy.
get very low in glycogen stores and you water load, so you're excreting fluids all the time, so you're just not holding on to anything. yeah, at least on the scales that the WNBF Worlds they had, I was 160 pounds. I was just like, when stood on that, I was like, I mean, that's great that I'm low because that put me at being in a low weight category. But I was like, oh my God, like, what have I done to be able to get this
Yeah.
light?
It's crazy too, because I looked at some of your pictures, like I think one you just posted and like a side by side. And I think it wasn't that low. It was maybe like
No,
168 versus 173 or something like that.
yeah,
Um, and just you look at the, I think maybe it was 175. It was like a 7 or 8 pound difference. And it's like, yeah, you can squint and you can see like there's some differences there, like you're more crisp, but more in like a complimentary way that like you still look so big at 168. And this is what can be so deceiving, I think, when people look at different weights and they just think of a weight. And I'm somebody who is big on mentioning like total body weight, and obviously there's a difference between pictures and in person, but still, how like the muscle mass is the muscle mass, and if you can like, there's just so much to strip still that most people don't even realize. I've talked recently, like this is the lightest I've been. I'm down to about 180, and typically I would get down to 180 and it would be like a day or like a couple of days, and I get some photos and I'm like, all right, like this is ridiculous, and I'd go back up to 190, 195, which is where I was always comfortable. And I think a combination of lower appetite and slightly more activity has made this actually pretty easy for me to maintain. I had like the holidays, I went up a couple pounds, and now within 4 or 5 days, I'm back down to my low. And it's like 2,900 calorie average, which, certainly you have a higher, maintenance than I do. But for me, that's like pretty easy to maintain. And all that to say that like most of the strength is maintained. And I know that I could absolutely like you have more, even though you're a little shorter than I am, you have more total lean body mass than I do. So if you get to 160, in theory, I could be like 155, which is just absurd. And I'm not saying that that would be a good look at all, but just that's that potential is there, and most people just don't know how much they could really lose.
yeah. It's like just a saying the bodybuilders have is like there's always more. Like I can always get leaner, but I think the second part of that is like, what's the sacrifice that you're taking to kind of get that level of leanness? I always think about it when we kind of the faster you gain, the more likely you're to kind of exponentially gain fat tissue, and as
Mhm.
you get leaner and leaner, and you're down to like essential levels of body fat. Any bit of weight you lose, your chances of risk of muscle loss is just greater and greater. And so I think, having spoken to Cliff about it, we decided, hey, we probably sacrificed a bit of fullness and size and muscle mass potentially to have got you down as lean as you were. And hindsight's 2020, right? I don't think it was probably worth that trade-off.
Mm.
Funny enough, with the rapid glycogen, like you can put on heaps of weight. I put on 2 kilos overnight through rapid backloading. We had, I think it was 1,000 like 300 grams of carbohydrates or something
Oh wow.
the day before the show, and like I don't know where fats were, but intake even was quite high. Protein was like at 100 or less, but
But you had
it was a lot of
1,300
food.
calories of carbs or 1,300 grams of carbs?
Grams.
Oh wow.
Yeah. It was like mini
In a single
meals
day?
through the day.
Wow. So what your total calories for that day would have been closer to like 6 or 7 thousand, right?
I could look back. I don't know if I actually even bothered tracking it, you know.
I was
I
thinking
don't
once
know
you
what it would
factor
have
in the
come to.
protein, probably I assume minimal fat, but even with the
No,
protein,
fat was reasonable actually. Cliff apparently decided that I seemed to respond quite well to fat, so he was giving me like some extra dark chocolate, and I ran out of olive oil because I only brought so
yeah.
much with me to the
Okay.
US.
But yeah, so man, that's a very high calorie day. Wow. If anything, I'm almost surprised you didn't gain more weight if you were that depleted, but because just the food weight plus all of the water and everything. But yeah, you certainly can rebound quite a lot.
Yeah, I definitely was glad to have seen it come up so much because I took some photos of me down that depleted and flat, and I was just like, man, I feel so underconfident and so bad. Like I felt terrible as well, as you can
Wow.
imagine.
Yeah. How was strength like the final weeks? I know you're naturally leaner, so
Yeah, so really, I'd have to look back at actual numbers in the gym, but during the depletion at least,
yeah.
it's kind of deload training anyway, which I wouldn't have been able to even try and do more than like a deload style workout.
Right.
Thankfully it was deload training. That's Cliff prescribes that. I was actually doing my training throughout. Just during peak weeks, he gives me a training plan to follow because it kind of complements the peak that he runs. outside of that, I was following my mesocycles, and I think I was pretty damn good up until I started dipping below 170 pounds, and we
Mhm.
started to try and take off like the final like pinches of body fat.
Yeah.
And so it was probably the last month where strength really started to like drop off. Not as bad as I hear some people go, uh, but like Alex Leonidas, I know he said
Yeah.
he lost a lot of strength.
That's who I was thinking
Mine
of.
didn't. Yeah, I thankfully didn't lose that much, and I really maintained it very well up until I went below about 170, and then when I got below that, it was just like I just didn't have it in me.
Yeah.
I lost all aggression. Like I didn't have that gear.
Hmm.
So and I think it's just a body fat being that low and then being so just generally depleted all the time, even after like you have a refeed, but it doesn't touch the sides.
Yeah. Are you blasting music when you're in the gym most days, or what do you listen to?
Yeah, I blast music. Like
Okay.
I even like people I've spoken about, oh, you could periodize it theoretically and it
Yeah,
could be a bit
yeah.
more optimal. And I try to like at least have lower volume of music like
Yeah,
when
yeah.
I'm earlier within a meso and then I like try and save like some of my I guess most invigorating tunes for like big compound lifts. But I have an anime playlist that probably
Okay.
won't surprise you. It's like
No.
just like remixes of various like speeches and stuff from various shows
Oh
that I've
yeah,
listened to.
of course, man.
And funky
My
with a
friend
P.
just introduced this to me. Like I'm talking like 3 days ago.
I
What's the
love that
band?
shit.
I just today. That's actually why I brought this up. It's yeah, Wicked Funk, um, DXRK.
Anything with like drum and bass,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
loud. For some reason, heavy metal doesn't do it for me. Like screamy, like
Mm.
drums and stuff like that doesn't do it for me. But like the funky stuff, yeah, it gets me going.
Yeah, well, because I used to listen to music and like actually something like the anime, like you said, like speeches and whatnot, like when I was younger. Not that I never do, but honestly, like in recent years, I've just kind of like mellowed out with it. But just today, I just had a leg workout like right beforehand, and I got this new playlist from my friend, and a few of these songs just like really like got me going. And actually, it was almost a little too much where I was finishing up with cardio, and I realized like I was good probably about 15 beats per minute higher than I would normally plan to go on this day. And I kind of had to like step back and was like, all right, like that was maybe like I got a little too amped up, you know? But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like, and obviously there's plenty of data out there on like music amping people up and everything like that. So I enjoy it. Sometimes I have like if it's just like a maintenance period of time, like I've listened to podcasts during workouts, which is obviously like gonna do the opposite.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I'm like grinding through a diet or something, I just need that next gear, then the music is very helpful.
Yeah, even yeah, it just got to the point where even the music was just like doing nothing for
Yeah.
me. Yeah, you just get to that point, and like I'd hit like zero RER or even failure, and you'd be like, you'd look at me, you'd be like, I think you had more, but I just didn't. I just
Yeah.
didn't have that gear, and I didn't really realize it until after Worlds we went to New York, and then about
Oh,
three,
that's
and
right.
I,
That's right.
immediately I went I this is how I always approach it. I just go back into hard training because it's just that's immediately what I want to do. I want to improve. I'm just like, yeah, training, it satisfies me psychologically and physiologically. I'm not in a place to do myself any problems because I'm still so weak and like
Right,
just
right.
don't have the ability to push that much. But after about 3 days of some good kind of recovery eating, I was able to feel like I had another gear and I could kind of get pumps in the gym again. And it's just been so like I've never I said this I think on the improvement season recently. I've never been so in love with training right now. Like I am
Oh,
just
that's
like
awesome.
it's amazing. I love it so much and I think it's kind of like because it got so shit.
Yeah, 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 right.
uh so you lose the love for training where it literally becomes a chore and now it's like I love it. And I wish it didn't come that way, but I think any competitor when you can't perform, like training is it doesn't have the same allure as it does when you actually can like do good work.
Yeah, I mean, that was always my favorite period when I was, still kind of progressing and whatnot, was when you would diet and you're pushing, and that first month after a diet, where sometimes you'd actually not when you're as depleted as you were, but you're cutting like 10% body fat, and then you start eating a little bit more, and you actually maybe drop a little bit more weight, right? Like Clyde McDonald, the long-term delayed fat loss effect and all that. To actually look better. You're eating more. Food tastes amazing. And it's like you're going from 1800 to 2400. You're like, oh, like this apple or a little bit of olive oil is like a big treat. Just everything is better. Training's going well. That was always just like the best period. This is actually, like I said, the first time where I've gotten to the low and I'm kind of just hanging out there, not really ramping back up. But I still had that period where you might have seen my post. I ramped up from about 2,300 to 2,800 calories, didn't gain any weight, and I just kind of feel better at this weight, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's that tr so long as you can, for I think a lot of people can experience at least when they go from like massing to cutting or cutting to massing, that transition, it can be challenging, but it's also a bit of a honeymoon period, especially when you're
Mm.
more experienced, where you can just manage it. So I would like the start of a diet for me is pure bliss. I'm just
Yeah,
like,
those are
oh,
so
no longer
cool.
force feeding. It feels so good. And then obviously it takes a turn. But then when you get to come back into massing, so long as you can control it, especially post show, that's really tough for some people.
Yeah.
I don't tend to find it as tough as others. I don't know why. I can be mechanical about it and a bit robotic, and yeah, find ways of kind of managing that hunger and everything.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
really enjoy how good food can taste. So I'm still in that. I'm still like right now, my hunger's dipped a bit, my food focus has dipped a bit, and I'm just like, man, I can just eat so much just good, quote unquote, good food, and it
Yeah.
tastes great. Like I can have like kimchi on the side there, and it tastes great
I was
with
going to
like
ask
some
about that.
salmon. And
Well, what's your current weight and rough calorie level?
so my calories are 3,400. Yeah, 3,450 there, thereabouts. And then my body weight's 175 pounds.
Man, that's crazy. You can maintain that leanness eating that much because you don't do any
I'm
cardio.
I'm probably still in a mild surplus. I've maintained around 175 for about a week or so, so I was
Hmm.
thinking maybe it's maintenance, but I think my weight might continue to creep up if I keep
Okay.
it here. So it's yeah, probably a small surplus.
And no cardio, right? No dedicated cardio, just
No,
steps and whatnot. And working out 5 days a week,
6 days a week training,
6 days a week. Okay.
like 10 to 12K steps, depending if I go for like a good walk on the weekend.
Okay. I mean that's still, significant. We talked before about my terribly low step count. So I do 4 dedicated cardio sessions a week because I only get 4 to 5 thousand. Actually, you know
Makes
what?
sense.
I gotta take that back a little bit. I actually looked at the whole year of 2024 and I averaged closer to 6,000, which for me was an improvement.
Nice.
Um, but then again, this doesn't count. Like most of my cardio is bike, like just a stationary bike. So it doesn't count that obviously as steps. So, if you were to equate it, who knows? But so on a typical day, you don't do any sort of intermittent fasting. So you're eating from the time you get up, more or less to the time you go to bed.
I'm still, this habit got created through prep where I push back my breakfast. So it's
Okay.
basically skipping breakfast in a sense.
Oh,
I
okay.
kind of have my first meal. I wake up at about 7. I have my first meal not till like 11.
Oh, okay.
So it's fairly significant. And then I basically have 3 larger meals and finish my day with a Ninja Creamy. I don't know if you've got a Ninja Creamy yet. If you haven't, you're gonna
No,
have to
what
get
is
on that.
it? Ninja
You've not
Creamy?
heard of it?
No.
No way.
What
So
is?
it's
I gotta look this up.
when you dive into this now, you're gonna get
Oh,
it
what?
popping up everywhere. You'll get all these adverts. It's basically
Ninja
you can create
Creamy.
your own ice cream from home.
Oh, like you make it with a Ninja blender.
Yes, it's a specific kind of model that Ninja do, and you kind of get these tubs. You can basically freeze like a protein shake, and then
Okay.
put it in the Ninja Creamy, and it makes it into an ice cream. So it's almost like your own Halo top, but without all the added stuff that they put in
Is
there.
that different? I mean, I've been making protein ice cream, quote unquote, for years.
This
I
will
know,
be
like,
that, but on steroids.
really? So how is it so much better then? Like, what's the ingredients?
I think it's just the blade. It whips it really, really well. So it's
Huh.
like has that ice cream style texture.
Okay. Because I mean, the one I make is pretty good. Like
Okay.
actually, people don't necessarily know this, but you can just, if you just freeze bananas and you literally just blend that, that itself can, and you know what? I do not know what causes the difference. Half the time I do that, it's kind of just dense, and other times it's kind of whipped and like airy. I don't know what causes that. But if you just add a little bit of protein powder, like whey just seems to make it fluffy. So 10, 20 grams of whey will make it this really fluffy, like basically ice cream. Now, does it taste like a Breyers or like, no, it doesn't taste like legit ice cream, but it's very good. A little bit of sugar-free syrup or like peanut butter or something like that. Obviously, at that point, you're adding calories with the peanut butter, but point is like I look at a lot of things in life where you're getting 80 to 90% for, 10 to 20% of the quote unquote cost. And this is one of those examples where, okay, maybe it's 40% of the calories of ice cream, but it tastes 80% as good. Like that's a pretty good
Yeah.
win for most days. But I'll have to look into this. So yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
it might be worth it to you. I don't know. I have a hard time imagining you can make as good ice cream as what the Ninja Creamy can. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
maybe $150 for a machine. You might be able to
Okay.
get one for less than that. It's a bit if it's quite big, to be fair. It's not huge, but
And
uh,
what are you
I
actually adding? Like, what are the ingredients you said?
I do 250 mils of skim milk with a scoop of whey, like 30 grams of whey, and then I normally chuck in a banana because
Yeah.
that acts as kind of an emulsifier
Hmm.
because it gives it that thickness. And then that's all I do. And I quite often add, you can add like mix-ins, that's what they call them. So I add like maybe you can add like a rice cake to it, adds texture, or I like putting in nuts. Now my fats are like in a good place. I just add like some
Hmm.
variety of different nuts to it. But
And
yeah,
this is
now you're
an ice, I assume?
so yeah, you make that mixture, then you freeze it overnight, and then you
Oh,
blend it
okay.
in the machine the next day. So you have to prepare it ahead of time.
Okay. Oh man, this could be trouble. We'll see. We'll see.
I think Matt Ogus was having two of them a day on his
Oh,
prep.
really? So what so because it's funny, like I'll tell because I also eat 3 meals a day. And just to clarify, when's your last meal of the day?
So I have that. I basically have dinner at like 8 p.m. and then I have the
Okay.
ninja literally right after like 9, and then I go to bed at like 10:30. So
Okay. So yeah, not quite intermittent fasting, but I mean, if you think of the typical 16/8, you're at like,
yeah,
14/10. Um, so because I'll tell some of my friends, I'm like, oh, this was my breakfast, like my kind of lifting friends, but not in the whole fitness scene. And they're like, oh my God, that's a disgusting amount of food. And I think it's just because I eat a lot of volume, but I'm like, guys, like this is 1,000 calorie meal. I eat 3,000 calories a day. Like, how is this? But I also think these are the people who don't think about the fact that yeah, like the chips you ate and the pasta dinner was probably 1,500 calories, but it was just a smaller volume of food. But certainly I'm big into like the higher volume food.
I relate to that a lot as I was at my basically parents-in-law. Not that I'm married, but I kind of can call them that by now because
Yeah,
we've
yeah.
been together 10 years. So I was like having a salad with just like chicken on it. And my partner's like my mother-in-law was just like, "How can you eat that much? Like, you look so good. It's so much food." I was like, this is like 150 calories or
Yeah, yeah.
something. She's like, "What? No way." I'm like, "Yeah, that bowl of like oats and cream of rice I had that you thought was huge and maybe like 2,000 calories. That was only like 600." It's like
Yeah, yeah.
people just don't people who don't or haven't tracked food before just have no idea. They just think size of things is equates
Yeah.
to calories or something.
Yeah, which I can even relate to myself because when I first started my fitness journey when I was like 12 years old, I would just go by like plates. I would have 3 plates a day, and I just it was just amount of food. I mean, I literally remember being 12 and eating like a cup of Raisinets, which was an absurd amount of calories, I'm sure, but it's like this is this amount, which is obviously, very dumb looking back on it. But I think a lot of people just don't necessarily like there's a lot of stuff we take for granted that the average person just might not realize.
Raisinets. What are those again? They're not
Those
just
are
raisins, are they?
raisins with chocolate. It's basically chocolate covered
Ah,
raisins. So a cup
damn,
of
they're
that
good.
would be, I don't know, 1,000 calories or
Yeah.
something like that, a
Do you
lot.
do something? Did the US have something where it's raisins that taste like cranberries or something? Like something
Craisins?
like that. Craisins,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. I don't like
We
them,
don't
but
have
they
that.
exist. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would be now at 3,400 calories? What would be like a typical day of eating for you?
Really easy to answer because it's been the same for the last weeks. I basically have in the morning, I make something called croats. I've named it. It's basically oats, but I don't want to just have more oats. So I add cream of rice to it and I cook it together. So it kind of
Hmm.
adds the texture of what cream of rice adds to the oats.
Okay.
I just don't want that much fiber. My fiber would
Hmm.
just get way out of hand if I just have this huge bowl of oats. So I have that with protein powder, blueberries in, and I have dark chocolate on top. And then I have they're called naked bars. And
I've
it's
heard of them.
basically it's literally dates and nuts, and that's all it is. It's like cold pressed into this bar,
Is it like an
so it
RX
tastes
bar?
probably similar.
Yeah.
Like it's minimally processed, and it tastes good. It's got like again dates and nuts, whatever. So I like having that. And then at the moment, I can tell I'm in a better place because I'm willing to put some calories towards an intra workout. So I have 20 grams of
Okay.
dextrose in an intra workout. And then I have again the croats, literally exactly the same. And I have an apple, kiwi normally. And then at the moment, I'm making my way through protein bars because this always happens to me when I go through prep in particular, but I get a
You
bit
stop eating the
obsessed
protein bars.
with protein bars. I don't eat them in prep,
Yeah.
but post, I'm like, oh, what can I introduce that's like a bit more palatable,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
not just kind of just a confectionery item.
Yeah,
So I end
gotcha.
up, and Christmas also, because you're a
Sure.
bodybuilder, you just get gifted fucking protein
Yeah.
bars. So my girlfriend got me a whole box of like different Mars branded ones. So like there's M&M
Okay.
protein bars, Mars
Oh,
protein bars,
really?
Snickers. So I'm having one of those alongside. They're like
This is your
200
lunch?
calories. Yeah, basically lunch post workout. And then my dinner is like a big salad. So I'll get like five, six fruit or veg with that. And then it's either like an omelet or salmon with it. And I normally have like sourdough or I might have some rice cakes, something alongside there. And then dinner is the Ninja Creamy. And then I might have a couple of biscuits if I can fit those in that we got like gifted some like some Christmas chocolate
Biscuits
basically
is
that I'm
like cookies, right?
yeah, cookies. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Just regular cookies or like protein cookies or
Oh no, they'd be just regular ones, so just like coated in chocolate, like shortbread
okay.
coated in chocolate or something. It's
Okay.
like I might have two that comes to like 250 calories at most or something.
So most days of the week you're having some of these quote unquote treats. You might protein bar in there, some actual cookies, this ninja thing, which is potentially healthy, but like it's not just chicken broccoli, 3 times a day or whatever.
No, that's how I always do my off seasons. I've never been that guy that's just like,
Yeah, yeah.
I kind of do the. I'm much better with a bit of something I fancy and mostly good, like on average. Sorry, not on average, like each day. Versus
Yeah.
some people will go like, hey, it's your classic bodybuilder, chicken, rice, and broccoli, and then cheat meal on the weekend.
Yeah, yeah. Which
That's
is
never been me.
well, I was gonna say because I would historically think of like, oh, like Steve Hall, like just no desire to cheat and no desire, whatever. But that probably is just that personality where you can include it and everything. It's funny, that's how like my mom versus my dad, and my mom always very thin. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into that, not necessarily because of what she does like physically or anything. But she'll just like eat a cookie or something, or like half a cookie. I just want to try this and like just kind of pick. Um, and my dad will kind of like be on something, but then it's like, oh, holidays come, eat a lot of junk, eat a lot of junk. And I am more towards the like having full meals of it, just because it's not as satisfying to me. I mean, just in general, like not even just food, I think very categorically, which has pros and cons to thinking that way. Um, and not in a way of like, oh, I had this cookie, I got to eat the whole box, like the horror stories you hear about, but just in general, like for example, I was clinical 4 days a week before, like in my office. And I was like, okay, I want to finish the year. And then January 1st of 2024, I'm going to 3 clinical days. And then like I hired an associate and I almost didn't hire somebody who was a good fit. And I did end up hiring them. But I was like, they'd be starting in September and I want to finish out the year. Like again, just very like categorical. So again, that's just me. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but so when I think of like foods, I kind of like to like, okay, this many meals is on, and then I will have one or two distinct meals that's not. Um, but clearly that does lead for me, I'm able to do that, get right back to it, whereas other people aren't. And I think you kind of just got to know yourself, and what works for you.
I think that's so well said. I think some people will hear what I do and they're like, "Oh no, that seems like so wrong. You're including a little bit of junk like every day, whatever. That's not ideal." And then other people similarly will hear like, "Oh, if like you're having whole days of it or whatever, like that doesn't seem healthy, like black and white thinking." But the more clients I work with, the more I realize it's whatever works for that individual. Some people can do that kind of on and off, and it actually works really, really well for them, doesn't stress them. But some people doing that, like you said, when they have that off, they just can never get back on it.
Yeah,
But that there might be that person, kind of, it might be you, Dave, where it's like having a cookie is just it's just not worth it ever unless I can have like three or four. It's
yeah,
like, okay, let's find a way that works and suits you. So again, it comes back to like the right tool for the person. So I'm in agreement.
yeah. I mean, it's like, I don't know, man, you want to just get the tip in like 4 times? It's like that's not satisfying. Like, let's just finish this and then we go to bed, you know? It's
There's definitely a spectrum.
yeah.
I will say there was a time we're doing dominoes like every week
Oh, really?
where it just and I again there'd be people that if a Domino's for them they hear that and they're like, all right, it's a large stuffed crust. I have
Right,
like
right,
I
right,
don't know
right.
all the sides and stuff. I'm like, I do a medium, low fat cheese, just veggie toppings. Like I
Oh,
keep it
interesting.
pretty chill and mellow. so I can enjoy it, but without having to go kind of crazy in calories. And yeah, when I was mini cutting, I can remember being like, right, I actually can't really justify eating a whole that, so
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
save half. And I did it once, and I was like, I hated that. I need to eat
yeah,
the whole fucking pizza.
totally.
I'm not doing it. We're not ordering it next week.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, and that's the thing. And I will say, like, I think it's rare that somebody's just always one way. Like you just gave the example there where you've had that other way. And so for myself, for example, today, going out with the guys and we're going to an all-you-can-eat sushi place. So this will be a clear, like, my breakfast was just a normal, healthy breakfast. I had a small lunch, and then I will probably eat 2,000 plus calories at all-you-can-eat sushi. And like that's a clear example of that. But I've certainly had where it's like, hey, you know what? I'm just gonna have a little bit of this. It's like pre-workout. I got this treat, and I'm gonna have some of it. Um, Plenty of examples where a little bit. I just, as we said, to me, it's not even that I couldn't do it. Oh, I can't have a little bit. It's just not that satisfying. Like if I just had lunch and you're like, okay, I just want to have half a cookie, I'd be like, why did I even eat that? Like it's just genuinely like not like I would just leave and be like, I should have just stuck to like just psychologically, not because it threw me off, but some people are like, yeah, that's all I needed.
Yeah.
So very
Yeah, I
different.
think it's like a bit of a spectrum, right? Like I can, I have that cutoff point too, where again, a random example, my girlfriend brought home, there was like a extra large, I think it was like a, what's it called? Salted caramel, like limited edition Twix bar.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, I can eat half of it. And I was like, that's fine. Like I can have, like, it's a packet of two Twix, like fingers. I was like, I have one finger. Some people would be like, I could only have it if I could have both and finish it all.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas there might be some people that would be like, oh, I could eat half of one of those Twix bars. I'm like, I couldn't do that. I couldn't
Yeah.
like
No,
that
no,
just
no.
feels too far.
Right, right. I think it's also helpful in terms of people who are looking for practical advice from this. I think it can be helpful when there's a clear cutoff point, like whether it's like you and your partner split it, so it's like it's just gone. Like again, I think both you and I probably don't have so much of a pull to keep going. But if you're listening to this and you're like, I do have that pull, it can be helpful to just be like, okay, like this is what I have. And when that's gone, it's just gone. And there's not an option to just keep picking. Because some people are like, oh, I'll have a slice of pie, but the rest of the pie's in the fridge, and I know it's in the fridge, and I can go get it. And I know I've had clients who it's like they will go in later and they will eat the whole pie. And so this is, I think, one of the issues with buffets. I occasionally will like a buffet, but that can be problematic because it's just like, where's the stopping point? I remember years back, this is why Lyle McDonald, for his books, would say if you're going to have like a refeed, a restaurant's a good option because it's just socially inappropriate to continue to eat. You have your meal and that's it, versus, you go to a buffet. I will say though, as an adult who doesn't really care about the cost of the restaurant, we have absolutely gone out to a place, seen four desserts, and be like, we're going to eat this one, but also let's order the other three and bring them home because I want to try them and I'm not going back to this restaurant. So I have done that.
Not enough. Yeah, the discrimination isn't high enough that you'd get in a restaurant from doing that. In
Right.
fact, in the US, maybe it's a little bit more. You guys do a lot of what's it called, doggy bags, right? It's very normal.
Yes.
So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Is that not big in the UK?
not as big, but it might be because our portion sizes are not quite as substantial as what you
Yeah.
guys have.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, no,
We're
it's very common here.
we're more clean the plate. I remember uh, what's it called? Primary school. And like you'd be told off if you didn't finish your plate. They'd
Yes,
be
yeah,
like,
yeah.
why haven't you finished it? It's like, because I
Yeah.
don't want to eat that.
That's a whole like, you can get a whole thing on like raising children and whatnot. Like, where's the balance between like don't
Yeah,
waste your food, but also do you really want to tell this kid to force feed? If they're just done, they're done. I think you'd have to learn that, okay, if you don't eat this, like the next time I'm just going to give you less. But I do think there can stem some issues from telling people like you have to finish everything.
for sure. Yeah, I'm not an expert on that, but I definitely think that's probably led a lot of people down the wrong route in terms of their body weight when younger
Yeah, yeah, for
and then
sure.
habits when older.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to get into a little bit with like training in our 30s now because I've had kind of mixed experiences where sometimes I'm like, oh man, this feels just broken. But personally, I have found a lot of it has to do with exercise selection. Like if I think back to when I was doing like heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, higher frequency, even in my early 20s, I would feel kind of broken. And now in my early 30s, it's like I actually joint wise feel pretty good, and so I haven't really noticed too much of that. I know some people say they can't handle as much volume. You certainly do significantly more volume than I do, Have you noticed like recovery changes or having to back off, or you still feel pretty good?
I think similar to you, when I was in my 20s, I kind of was going through like a powerlifting era in some sense, or power building even. So I was doing a lot of the big compound lifts. I also didn't have the fundamental understanding of how I should be lifting for muscle growth in terms of trying to take a target muscle close to failure versus then I was just like, lift as heavy as possible, A to B,
Yeah.
and let's try and add weight and load like every single week. So I kind of beat myself into an inappropriate pulp back then, whereas now it's very much like, hey, let's find movements where stimulus fatigue ratio, taking that into consideration, I'm getting more of that stimulus side of the equation and not the unnecessary fatigue in terms of joint connective tissue and stuff like that. So if anything, I actually feel a bit better now than I did in my 20s. The only thing I've recently been struggling with is just a random SI joint flare up.
Okay.
Seems to be associated with hip hinging, and I'm not sure why because I look at my technique and form and I'm like, it's good, and I
Yeah.
sometimes get the flare up and sometimes don't. And sometimes with my wrists, I sometimes get irritation. Like I can't be fully supinated in like an incline curl. I have to go slightly neutral to be able to feel like comfortable in that. But so long as I do those things and I'm not an arsehole and work through pain and discomfort, I seem to be able to just like feel very good. And yeah, not kind of beat up, which is fortunate.
Good. Yeah, I mean, when I talk to people who are a little bit older, like Brian Borstein and whatnot, he says he still feels great. He's doing a little bit more of like a low volume experiment now, but it seems like for the most part, as long as you're reasonable about it with bodybuilding specifically, you can kind of hold up. I think when you get into powerlifting, certainly like Brazilian jiu-jitsu and stuff, you just start to get more and more beat up, with age. But it seems like, again, because I had a period where I had probably like four or five different areas that were bothering me, like elbow and ankle and this. But I think it could have been a number of things, but I do think a lot of it was like training. And when I just kind of manipulated my training, for the most part, it's been pretty good, which is really nice about bodybuilding that like you can just kind of do what feels good and you don't have to force. Like I was getting this weird, I mean, like pretty substantial mid back issue that was like a nerve. It was almost like a sciatic pain. If I were to lean forward, it would trigger it. And so, like, the exact position that would be problematic was seated leg curls. You're just everything, that whole nerve is just stretched. And I was pushing through it and pushing through it, and it was just getting worse and worse. And eventually, I'm just taking this out completely, started getting better, implemented a cable leg curl, seated leg curl. Again, same problem. And now, like, despite the potentially 10% inferiority of a lying leg curl, I do two different lying leg curl variations, no problem. I do my leg extensions lying back, which, you could argue is a little bit of a benefit there with the extra stretch. And that just is gone. And it was literally to the point that it's like affecting my practice, affecting like I had to stand during podcasts. And just that change seemed to have really, really benefited me. So the ability to be able to move some things around like that is great.
Yeah, that's why I always bring this up to clients where I'm just like, hey, we're not bound to any lifts like power lifters. If the bench is causing them irritation and they've got a powerlifting meet in a few weeks, like there's not much, like you still have to bench a little bit probably here or there to kind of keep the technique. But as a bodybuilder, with so many tools at our disposal, we just need to find a way of training that muscle. So your example there's perfect. And also the example of like, and I've been there. I'm sure we've all been there with, I don't know, like squats, for example. Tom Platz, like he was like, the squats are the most important lift to build up your thighs. You've got to be squatting. There's something magical about the squats. It's like held on to that lift for ages, and actually, it was probably not the best lift for me to build up my quads. And so, kind of separating the ego from certain lifts is a really good idea, or even evidence, for example, like you said yeah, maybe the seated leg curl is more optimal, but actually for you, Dave, lying leg curls are more optimal because you don't get the fucking pain.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
just like detaching yourself from that, like I was doing Bayesian curls with the supinated like arm because they feel
Mhm.
better that way, but that was causing me irritation. So I was like, I'll just do a neutral grip. Like I don't think hammer curls are as effective for overall arm growth versus other curling variations probably, but hey, I'm still training the bicep here,
Yeah,
still
yeah,
getting good stimulus and volume.
for sure. What are some other exercises that you're going to be adding? Because I think you said you're going to be adding overhead press for the first time in a while. I think you mentioned chest work in general and glute work even.
Yeah, so I've never done, or never. So I used to do hip thrusts, but that was just me being like a bit of a Brett Contreras fanboy of being like, they're so good, right? They help everything. And especially powerlifting, they were like, hey, hip thrusts are going to help your squat, they're going to help your deadlift, your lockout, everything. So you should be doing hip thrusts. So I did like barbell hip thrusts. I even bought like a big thick pad to be able to take with me to gyms because
Okay.
obviously it hurts your pelvis a lot if you don't have the proper padding. So I was doing those for the longest time, but then I hadn't done them for years upon years. So basically dropped them in 2017, I think, and I hadn't done any hip thrusting, any glute isolation work. It was all hitting quads and hamstrings through compound lifts, which inevitably are going to train your glutes really well anyway. And my glutes aren't underdeveloped, but Cliff did say he thinks maybe I struggled to get my condition through the rear of my glutes because of a development. And
Mm,
I don't know, but I'm like, I'm willing to do a bit of glute work to see if I can get those rear glutes in before the rest of me diminishes. Because to get my glutes nice and lean for the rear, just everything, I have to sacrifice so much other tissue, which it just becomes not worth it. So I'm doing only, I do two straight sets and then I do like a one myo match after that. So I might do like a set of 20 and then do 16 plus 4, for example. I do that twice a week basically. So I'm not doing a lot.
of hip
But it's
thrust, you said?
yeah, of hip
Okay.
thrust. So it's four sets kind of, or you might say here that's like five sets maybe
Yeah.
through the week. But in addition to RDLs and doing my kind of deep leg press and squats and stuff like this. So
Okay.
it's more than I've done in the past, but certainly not loads. And then the overhead press was just basically my top line on a front relaxed is lagging behind other competitors and it hurts my X frame and symmetry. So anything that can build up my shoulders, my upper chest is stuff I need to focus on to just have that illusion
Hmm.
come through a bit more to kind of, I guess, climb the pro ranks now. And so overhead pressing is always something I've been really shit at. And so I've always loved the bias that I already had towards it because I was crap at it, that you don't need to do overhead pressing if you're already doing plenty of chest work. So I was
Sure.
like, great. So I hadn't really ever put much time or effort towards it. My last off season, I did do it a little bit. I had it in one of my push sessions, but it was like towards the end. I went into it like pre-fatigued because I'd already done my chest and like shoulders and everything. And I think even triceps, I put it right at the end just to kind of give it a bit of something. But now I'm doing two push sessions, and one of them I start with lateral. Well, I start with calves. I did it today, calves, then lateral delts, and then I do my overhead press, and that's before any of my other pressing.
This is a
And so
barbell
I'm
press.
a machine. So I do a
Mm.
seated machine press. It's a Paramount old machine that we have in our gym. It feels good to me. I do lengthen partials on it, kind of. I don't lock out at the top to really make like because then triceps are just getting tired. I do that with a lot of my pressing now, actually, where I just don't worry about locking out, which I know is something you've done for quite a while, right? You
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
don't do that last bit, which I think makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I'm doing that to kind of build up the top line and then chest because similarly, my chest, I think a lot of people look at it and they think it's quite a strength and it does get really lean and it looks good. But then when I, again, to get in the rest of my condition through like my lower back, the glutes, the quads fully through my chest, because it gets lean so soon, just starts to like get really small and shrink.
Really? Hmm.
So I'm like, how can I fight that? Make my chest even bigger.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I've never prioritized chest before. It's always been back because
Okay.
again, for my X frame, get that width. But I think my back is actually quite a strength. If there's anything on my upper body in addition to my arms, that is a strength. So at least for the initial period of my off season, chest, shoulders is always like delts. I start with those every single upper body session and then yeah, a little bit more glute work than usual, but quads are my main focus
Okay.
as always.
Cool, man. So in line with the aging, I mean, again, we obviously, kind of fortunate with your passion being bodybuilding that you can kind of keep going up and then maintain for a very long time. Do you find, and I'll just, show my cards, I do find this, that it's hard to pick up new hobbies as we get older, and at least like dedicate oneself to it. Like in my opinion, you can really only be good at a couple of things in life, like truly good. I mean, and I know people who, I mean, obviously, like the classic, jack of all trades, master of none and all that. And I think for me, it's not that I have to be the best at anything I do, not at all. But there are certain things where I look at it and I'm like, this is just fun. I'm going to play ping pong. I'm going to play some Super Smash Bros. I'm going to do whatever. And it's just fun to do it. And I don't really care if I'm progressing. But then there's like a few key things where it's like, in business, lifting, a few things where I'm like, I want to do this and improve, and I want to see the tangible improvements. And if I don't, I'm just not that interested in putting in that much work. And I was wondering if you relate to that at all.
Definitely hard to pick up new what's it called? Hobbies and things like this. I think there's also this is I don't know if it's been researched, but I feel like it has. I feel like I heard a researcher talk about it. It's like it's harder as you age to like get friends,
Sure.
and like it just takes a longer time. Whereas a big part of friendship is like spending time with that person. And so at school, you just spend ages with people, and so you get really strong relationships. Whereas you maybe make friends with people at work, but then like I don't go to work. I work from home, so I've just got
Yeah,
this
right, right.
dog that's my friend. And maybe I slowly build up friends with people who I podcast with if we spend enough time together and kind of have that rapport build. But anyway, I'm on a tangent. Yeah, I get very obsessive about things, so I kind of want to put everything into something or nothing. So I get like interested in things and then I just go all in, and then I don't really want to get interested in other things because it will take away from that thing that I'm so fully invested in.
Right.
So yeah, I do find it challenging to pick up like new hobbies and things like that. And then I also become a bit disinterested in like mastering it. Like I invest some money, but I by no means an expert anywhere close. And actually, I'm not interested. I just want to know enough so that I'm not being an idiot with my money
Hmm.
and that I'm investing it somewhat intelligently. But past that, I'm much more interested in learning more about bodybuilding and maybe podcasting and how to grow the social media so then I can grow my business, stuff like that. So yeah, I'm sometimes even jealous of people who kind of, I don't know, they play the piano, they play golf, they bodybuild, and they like cooking, and they like don't know, they listen and follow chefs and stuff like that. I'm like, I have
Yeah,
no
yeah, yeah.
idea how you can do all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, well, especially for you, because this is your entire life. Like for me, that it's a hard decision because I put so much of my image and who I am and who I see myself as is like, fitness guy. But then you do have to try to be logical about it as well. And it's like, you could imagine that somebody is really dedicated to basketball and they don't make it on the college team, but they keep playing. And now they're 27 and they're playing all the time. And it's like most of us would look at that person and say, look, man, you should not be dedicating 20 hours a week to practicing basketball. Like that does not make sense for your life and you should move on. If you want to keep playing pickup and everything, that's fine. And the reality is, as that person backs off, they will be worse at basketball, but they never had the potential to be like in the NBA anyway. So then it's like, well, hey, I can be a 70th percentile basketball player. You got to be 99th percentile for NBA. If I stop practicing, though, I'm going to drop to 60th percentile, and I don't like that. And so, because lifting is something we should all be doing anyway, and we want to have it as part of our lives, that can be hard again in my example where I'll think, well, I'm never going to be like a pro bodybuilder. I'm never going to be a pro bodybuilder. So I could be, again, let's just say 70th percentile. Should I logically tell myself, hey, back off a little bit so you can do all these things? Because we know you could spend literally 40% of the amount of time and still maintain 85, 90% of the results and do these other things. But that's very hard for again somebody like me where it's like no but like that was my thing, that's what I was known for. And do you let your ego kind of get in the way? And everybody's got to have to psychologically analyze themselves and figure out what makes sense for them. I think for you it's almost a little bit more clear because it's like no, this is how I make my money, this is how I have a podcast, this is what I'm doing. So you're the professional basketball player, it makes sense for you to do it. But almost everybody listening to this podcast is not that person. And you just have to think about, man, like when, like, do you ever just drop that? And it's hard, and I don't have an answer. I just a side note, I thought about this the other day for like calf training, for example. We talked about my experiments, and I was thinking like, okay, so most people, if you think about all like the leg curls and leg extensions and squats and maybe cardio and everything you're doing, I'm not saying that direct calf work wouldn't do anything, but let's just say you maxed out all of your muscle growth for that, and you were going to have, whatever, 28-inch thighs and you were going to have 16-inch calves if you didn't directly train them, because obviously they're going to grow as you gain weight and everything. And if you really directly train them 10 sets a week to failure, maybe the difference is like 16 and a half or something like that. So you think, okay, well, that's 500 sets a year of pain and all these things, and then, 5,000 over 10 years. And for that time, you maintained a half an inch. I'm not saying that's worth it or not. If you're a bodybuilder, it clearly is. But for anything, you could break down these things and say, like, is that actually worth the time for that if you have 98% of the same physique and you get all those hours back? Again, not a right or wrong. It's just
Yeah.
it's just how I think about a lot of these things.
Yeah, it's the opportunity cost is real, and the diminishing returns that you get once you're quite advanced is large. And so the rational decision is probably to like, hey, back off, go get better at something else and maintain the results you've got. I remember training with a client once. He was like, oh, if I look like you, I'd literally just do 2 sessions a week,
Yeah.
maintain, and then have all the free time. And I was like, but I'm just not built that way.
And that
But
mindset
so
would have prevented you probably from getting there.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I know, like someone who comes to mind, I don't know why, Greg O'Gallagher. I don't follow him closely, but I feel like his physique is kind of maintained over the last like
Long
5 years or
Yeah.
so. And I imagine he's like a bit of a low volume guy from the looks of things. He's just happy, just like plugging away, getting stronger, doing that, and like clearly building his business massively and focus a lot of time on that.
Yep.
And like that's probably a really rational decision. Like money is important, so on and
Mhm.
so forth. Uh, but like you said, if I'd kind of taken that approach from the get-go, I'd have never continued bodybuilding past that first comp prep where I didn't do very well. And people
Yeah,
looked at
yeah.
me like, I specifically remember my mum being like, you don't have the shape the other guys have. I don't
Oh,
know if this is
really?
for you.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
yeah, I know. She actually brought it up when I went pro. She was like, man, you proved me wrong, didn't you? I
Wow.
was like, yeah. So, but yeah, I'm exactly that person that if I hadn't put in the time and effort that I had over the last 15 years into bodybuilding, I wouldn't have been able to take it to the highest level that you can as a bodybuilder naturally. And yeah, so it's like a what if, like what if I didn't do all of that? But
Yeah.
yeah, if
Sure.
you start doing that in so many areas, I even think about it with like business. Like I was like, oh, what if I went all into the podcast? I just didn't worry about doing any vlogs, halved my client numbers, didn't post on Instagram, and I just went all into the podcast, invested 10 grand so I can like travel and like interview people one on one. I'm sure people would like I could go travel to Mike and I could interview him and then go to Menno and I could do that. Would that pay off for the and how would that make me feel? I'd have to leave the dog and I don't know. It's just yeah, you do actually this is the thing I was coming back to. You mentioned being hard to pick up new hobbies and things. Greg Potter has talked about this where the more you do a routine and structure, the more ingrained it becomes. It's kind of like skiing down a slope, like that.
Mhm.
The path you've taken is getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and you're becoming more in a valley, so it's hard to get out and take different routes. And so, yeah, it's hard once you've had so much time doing the same thing to do anything else.
Yeah.
He talked about that in the context of, I think, like microdosing, like mushrooms or something, which makes
Mm.
you think laterally.
Okay.
He was like, probably a good experience for you. I was like, yeah, probably actually really would be.
Yeah, yeah. It is so interesting. And going back to what I said about if you had that mindset of somebody who's like, oh, once I had that, I just would train 2 days a week. That is not the mindset of somebody who has gotten to where you've gotten. And I think about that sometimes for people who, I don't want to say who this is, but somebody I know who's not terribly successful in life was talking about, my business and finances and whatever. And they were like, oh, like I would just like not work as much, or I would spend this, or like, why are you being like so stingy with this or whatever? And it's like, okay, but again, not to hate on them, but it's like that mindset is exactly you're the person who, if you won the lottery, you'd have no money a year from now. And it is that exact mindset that is preventing you from getting, obviously there's other factors, but I'm just saying, like it's the same people. Like, why is this person still growing their business? They have $100 million net worth. It's like because that's who they are, and that and unlike bodybuilding, you have potentially infinite growth with business and finances and things like that. So, or real estate, and as you accumulate more and more, and it becomes less about this amount of money, it's or assets, it's it's progress, and it's just you're that guy. And so it can be hard to separate that from like the seemingly rationale. viewpoint of, well, no, like you have this, so that's plenty, you know?
Yeah, and at least the cool thing is, at least now I can look back and hindsight's 2020. Like I legitimately look at my physique now outside of being depleted and flat in prep. And I look at myself in the mirror once I've got a bit of a pump and I'm like, dude, you are literally the guy that if you saw in the gym 10 years ago, you'd think he was on roids or
Yeah,
you'd
yeah.
you'd be like, that is my goal. And I'm like, oh, that's fucking cool. I mean, it took a long time. You
Yeah,
could
yeah.
probably have achieved it in a quarter of the time if you did take PEDs, but then
Sure.
what are you sacrificing everything else, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's nice having done that and yeah, smelling the roses now and then. But it's exactly like you said. I don't understand the mindsets of the people who, like you said, who would win the lottery and then just spank it in like the next year
Yeah.
and be in just as bad a position as they were before. It's yeah, I know people in life that are like that, and unfortunately, they don't tend to get to as like higher places maybe they could. But as long as they're happy, they
Yeah, I
often
don't know if
aren't.
they are necessarily, but um, so one of the last topics I just want to ask you about. So you are covering yourself in tattoos, man. You're getting coated here. So is that something that you thought would always like you just knew you were going to always get a lot of tattoos, or is it just like that kind of addiction of, hey, I got the one, oh, I want to add this, I add this. Like, how's that progress been?
Yeah, so I don't know what it was. I think Pascal probably influenced me a little bit because he's very well, he's really covered now. He's going to get like basically his whole body is going to be
I
covered in
heard him talking
tattoos.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be his end. Like you just won't even know it's him. It's just like tattoo man. So yeah. Anyway, he's obviously always had them, and then Jackson Pios, who you probably
I
know,
know the
Jackson.
name. Yeah.
Yeah, so he did a lot of the diet break research,
Okay.
and he's been on my podcast, and he's kind of covered in quite a few tattoos. And I was like, man, it just looks. I really like that aesthetic. And then as I got more into anime and just like kind of fell in love with some of the artwork from it, I was just like, man, I kind of want to get one. And when I got one, people tell you that you're going to want more. And I didn't really think about it. I didn't set up like my half sleeve that I have, the Dragon Ball sleeve. I didn't set up with the first one to make a half sleeve. It was like a standalone piece. So in fact, it had like hard edges. It was a bit, it kind of looks like it's part of a sleeve design now, but it
Hmm.
wasn't. It was like a one off. But
Okay.
as soon as I had that one there, I was like, kind of looks naked. I think I need some more. And I very quickly got that whole half sleeve done in. And I mean, in a good or bad way, the tattoo shop that I got this initial half sleeve done was local to me. So it's literally a 5 minute walk. It's actually closed down now, but it was open enough of a time so I could go and get this whole half sleeve done. And I could do that without it disrupting life basically at all, apart from some of the healing, which because I work from home, it's completely fine. So I definitely didn't set up. I hadn't known I wanted tattoos for a long time, but it's like I said, when I get into something, I kind of go head
Yeah, yeah.
first and I just kind of get obsessed. And once I'd done that sleeve, I was like, the black and gray is cool, but I wish I'd gone color. So then I was like, let's get some color done. And I don't know the the thing I am probably going to struggle with is once I've covered all the areas that I don't think matter for bodybuilding,
Mm.
what will I do? Or the areas I'm happy to get tattooed because theoretically a face tattoo doesn't matter for bodybuilding, but I'm not going to get a face tattoo.
Right, right.
So yeah, I didn't set out with it, but yeah, once I got one, it was just like became a little bit addictive to
Yeah.
kind of see that artwork, and yeah, I quite like the look.
Yeah, it's interesting how people kind of go down that rabbit hole. I don't I don't remember who said this, but somebody had said you don't put bumper stickers on a Ferrari. And, basically just to say like, your body's a temple and, why would you do that?
Yeah.
And I see it with bodybuilding. I'm kind of neutral to it. I mean, I don't personally like get into tattoos, but I've seen some cool ones. I've seen some meaningful ones. I've seen some actually really cool artwork where it's like on like a burn victim or something, and
Yes.
they get the tattoo to cover that up, and that's really awesome. And then I guess technically the like micropigmentation that people get on their scalps, the what is it, SMP, is
Yeah.
uh is a tattoo essentially, right? So
Yeah.
there's different utility to it. But yeah, I haven't gone down that rabbit hole, but I know a lot of people. I heard Pascal talk about potentially doing a neck tattoo. I think he was saying something like that.
He's gonna get his neck done. He's already booked in for a full his chest, armpits, the whole
Wow.
works. He's literally I don't know. I'm imagining he's gonna get his whole body done
Yeah.
eventually.
I wonder, and again, I'm not trying to hate or anything. This is genuinely curious. Like myself, I think when you see the average person who's got that much artwork, that many tattoos, I certainly have always kind of tended to think like, is there something going on there psychologically?
Probably.
So I don't know if, yeah, how you think of that, but and again, there's no way that doesn't come across as negative to some degree. But you see it and you're just like, like what drives somebody to do that? And he even mentioned in the podcast, you kind of become a little bit of an outcast. You become like a scarier individual to the average person. You probably seem a little bit less trustworthy, right? If my 16-year-old daughter is walking down the street and it's like, hey, this person has a million tattoos and this person has none. I'm like, you just fear that way a little bit. These are just things that, you kind of have that initial thought. Doesn't necessarily mean obviously that that's how the person is, but
Yeah, I think because of where like tattoos, I don't know a whole lot about it, but where well, we associated them with like people in prison. Like my dad
sure.
always jokes, he's like, "Oh, you look like you should be in prison or whatever," because these are
Yeah,
prison tattoos and stuff like
yeah.
this. And obviously, they were associated with like the Yakuza in Japan and that sort
Mm.
of thing. And in fact, in Japan, you can't go into some of the, I forget what they're called, the pools, the baths, like the kind of areas they
Oh,
have.
oh
And
yeah,
in
yeah.
gyms, you can't have tattoos. You have to be covered up.
Really?
So yeah, it's got negative connotations with it. And so but I think that's just, it's like a lot of things. It's correlated with various negative aspects. And I think because they're becoming more and more mainstream tattoos, I think less and less people kind of view it that way. But I have even thought about it. I'm like, I'm that guy. I'm like somewhat muscular, shaved head,
Yeah, right. A
tattooed.
shaved head now. Yeah.
How bad am I going to make my social exclusion for myself of where people
Right.
just look at me like I'm a thug?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I mean obviously like you're a super nice guy, right? Like most people would not know just like, oh, this is like the nicest guy in the industry, but yeah, it's just interesting. I don't think right or
I
wrong.
Yeah, and I think part of me also got the tattoos because I tend to feel like I'm a bit PG. I kind of liked a little bit something quirky about it, that it is a bit different.
Sure.
And so I kind of went it down that route. Like I've actually considered, especially I've considered this before I shaved my hair off, but now I've shaved it off. I'm like, maybe I need to get like a nose piercing or an ear piercing, like maybe just a little bit, so a little bit quirkier. And
Steve,
I'm
don't get a
like,
nose piercing, man. You're off the podcast.
not a
Uh,
fan of those. A septum one right here, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
I'm thankful I've done it when I was older because I think younger me would have got some maybe not best tattoos. I forget what age your brain is fully formed as like a male, and so you've kind of, you know what you like, you know what you don't, and you're not going to change your opinion that much. So I'm glad I've got that. I have enjoyed. Had it on the cruise when I went on it. Some of the staff members like came up to me like, "Can I take pictures?" I've actually had whenever, I don't know why, it's always when I'm on holiday in the US. I had it in
Yeah,
New
yeah.
York. I had it in where did I have it, in like Miami on the cruise ship, where people wanted to like talk to me about these tattoos. They're like, "Oh, is that Naruto?" Or is it like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
yeah,
can I
yeah.
take a picture?" Like in the UK, people aren't as friendly, so I
Oh,
don't get
really?
that much.
Okay. All right, man. So always good catching up. Glad to dive into all this stuff. I'm sure people are very familiar with you at this point, but where can they find more of you?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's always great catching up and having just a general chit chat. It's the most fun, to be honest, when they're this way, like nice and laid back. And yeah, so revivestronger.com is the website. So they'll be able to find everything on there in terms of like our coaching, the podcast. But you can search Revive Stronger podcast on any podcast platform. Find us on YouTube. And then I'm Revive Stronger on Instagram. And that's most of everything. Thank you very much for
Awesome.
having me again. And hopefully people took something from this.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, man.